So a quick question for you this morning, and just simply raise your hand if this applies to you. But the question is simply this: how many of you are looking forward to fall? Okay, I want to get a good look. Because my next question is why? Why? Like for me, summer is fantastic. The weather is warmer. The days are longer. The nights are shorter. And I just think, I don't know, it's anecdotal for me, but people seem happier in summer. Well, maybe not all people, but I seem happier in summer. And I get the whole changing of the season stuff, if you want to believe that hype. But the reality is this is the issue with fall, is that you know what's on the heels, and that is winter, and in my humble opinion, lousy weather. Right? Like just not helpful at all. But one of the realities, wherever you stand on fall and what that means for you, is I'm sure for many of us, it means that life kind of ramps up again. Right? University age, college age, you're going back to school, you're getting back into classes, kids are going back to school. I'm sure teachers are just loving this reminder already. Activities and events are beginning. You know, things seem quieter at work oftentimes through the summer. Things are ramping up again. But the fall just seems to be that time in life, that season in life, where life gets busy again. And in many ways, we talk about January as being the start of the year, and we make New Year's resolutions and everything else. But ultimately, really, for many of us, it's September. September is the starting of the year, where we get ramped up, we get fired up. And in many ways, it comes down to how busy life gets. And as I was thinking about September, as I was thinking about my own life, as I was thinking about this element of busyness, I noticed a tension, almost an irony in the midst of the culture that we live in. That we live in a culture that understands busyness almost as a way of life, but even more than that, it becomes a badge of honor. It becomes almost as an identifiable mark as being significant and important. Yet, we understand the challenges and the dilemmas that as often comes with being busy. The downside of it. We know the health issues around to a life that is frantic and busy and is hectic. We can become tired, we can become exhausted, pushed to the end. It can even lead to burnout. Yet we continue to strive to be busy. We also know the toil it can take on relationships. Whether it's family, whether it's friends, things, relationships that we want to form, relationships we want to build, relationships we want to nurture. Yet so often, we can't fully give the time we want. Why? Because we're so busy. Or maybe you felt the tension where there's things you want to do, yet because you are so busy, you fail to do them. Things that you would even identify as being real important. Conversations you've had about, I would love to take that trip, or I would love to do whatever, fill in the blank. And then you think, but I can't do it right now because I'm so busy. It's almost the automatic response that we give to someone when we walk up and ask, hey, so how are you doing? And so often the response is, oh, I'm so busy. And we act as if it's a good thing. Now, you don't have to come to church. You don't have to have faith in Jesus to understand that we live with this dynamic at work. That we live with this tension between being busy and what it may be taking from us. But I think if you start to dive a little bit deeper, you begin to realize that there's something even far greater at stake when we become too busy. Far greater than just becoming tired. Far greater than just missing opportunities. Something far greater than even not being able to spend time with the people you want to spend time with. That as you start to dive into the teachings of Jesus, you begin to realize that busyness is not just simply a lifestyle issue. It's a spiritual one. Because I wonder at times, as we start to think about why we need to be so busy, if it begins to dive a little bit deeper into our identity, into our sense of self-worth. that being busy almost becomes a sense of purpose in life. As I've thought about this, it kind of goes like this in my mind, right? You want to be busy because then people need you. Or you want to be busy because then you're seen as important. And so if I'm busy, then I'm needed and I'm important, and therefore I have a sense of identity, I have a sense of worth, and it gives me purpose. And if I'm not busy, heaven forbid we answer that way. Oh, how's life going? Oh, I'm not that busy at all, right? You may step back and think, well, what are they going to think of me? Are they going to think I'm not needed, that I'm not important? Or maybe we start to think of it in that way as well. And that's when I begin to think of the importance of understanding that this is far more than just a lifestyle choice. This begins to hit at the heart and the reality of who we are in Jesus. It's interesting, when Jesus was teaching in the Gospel of John, he says, I have come so that you may have the abundant life, the life worth living. And yet sometimes we struggle with the fact that, we live in the midst of life and we're not experiencing this sense of abundance. And perhaps, it's because we've fallen off the rails and we have begun to pay too much time and honor to the idol of busyness. And so how do we respond? Because I know in the midst of all of life, life is busy. We live in seasons of busyness. And so maybe you're thinking, yeah, that's wonderful, and you can speak about this, but you don't understand my life. You don't understand the things that are going on, or the commitments that I've made, or the expectations placed upon me. And so this morning, I hope we can just kind of get even more practical. Start to understand, how do we respond in the midst of life? In the midst of a culture that continually seems to promote a sense of busyness, and live in a way so that we experience this abundance of Christ in all of life. So to help us out, we're going to jump back into the passage that Heather read this morning. It's Luke chapter 10. If you have a Bible, whether on your phone or your tablet, you want to swipe there, or if you want to go old school and grab one of the Bibles in front of you, you can pull it out. Listen, I said this last week, and we'll say it most weeks. If you don't have a Bible at home and you would like a Bible, feel free to take the one right in front of you. Or if you'd like a softer copy, we have Bibles at the welcome table. We just love to get it into your hands and take it with you. But we're going to jump into this passage in Luke chapter 10, because there's this rather interesting dynamic that Jesus has with two sisters, Martha and Mary. That Jesus shows up at their home one day. And this was not just simply a random occurrence, but rather Jesus had a relationship with Mary and Martha. And so Jesus shows up, and Martha, we're told, is busily getting everything ready. Making sure the food is ready, making sure what they're going to drink is ready, making sure the house is ready. And she is running around frantic, distracted, upset, making sure that everything is going right. Mary, we're told, her sister, is sitting at Jesus' feet. Now that's an interesting phrase we're going to come back to, so just hold on to that for a moment. But in Martha's opinion, Mary is doing diddly squat. She is doing everything. Now I see some heads nodding and everything else. I hope you're just tracking with the story and not thinking, oh, I know a Mary in my life. Right? I know a Mary, when people come over, I'm running around, I'm doing all this stuff, and they may not be sitting next to Jesus, but they're certainly sitting down. And she's like, I can relate to that. And so what does Martha do? We're not given all the details, but it must have been significant. And I often think that Martha probably would have been subtle enough to kind of start dropping some hints to Mary. And clearly Mary ain't picking up on any of it, because now Martha is going for the ultimate shot. She goes directly to Jesus, right? Like, pull Jesus out of the equation. Imagine someone is behaving in such an inappropriate way in your mind that you go to your guess, right? You go to your guest and say, hey, can you tell my fill in the blank, don't say it out loud, to get in here and help me because I'm doing everything. You start to sense the frustration. And then Jesus responds with the words that I'm sure Martha did not expect. Because there's nothing worse than when you ask a question of someone and it's a leading question, you think they're going to be on your side, and then they completely flip it on you. Listen to what Jesus says. Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. Martha's probably thinking, yeah, I am. Get on with it. Let's go. But only one thing is needed. And Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. What? Like if you're Martha, you're probably sitting there thinking, Jesus, I'm doing all this work. Jesus, I'm doing all this work for you. And Mary is just sitting there doing nothing. Okay, so listen up real quick here, because I do not want you to walk away from this morning and say, hey, I heard the guy at the front read from the Bible, and he told me that sitting and doing nothing is the more godly thing. No, we are not going away from that. That is not what is being taught here, right? There's something even greater going on. We're going to get to it in a moment. But I just want to make sure that Jesus is not speaking against work, and Jesus is not promoting not working. Jesus is hitting at something far more significant, and you begin to see it in the details. And it's the first line when Jesus, we're told that Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet. This would be a phrase that would be used commonly in the Jewish tradition and language for those that were falling under the leadership and the authority and the direction of a rabbi or a teacher. This was not a positional description. This was not like Mary was just hanging out by the fireplace or Mary was just lounging on the couch, like we actually needed to know that detail. No, what Luke is telling us is that Mary is positioning herself to listen and to follow Jesus. And what Jesus is beginning to identify is the significance of that. And you start to see that even in his conversation with Martha. As he says to her, Martha, you are upset and worried about many things. You are so busy. You have so much going on in your mind that you're failing to recognize only one thing is needed. Spend time. Spend time with me. And so what's the tension? What is the response? How do we respond to a passage like this? Do we just say, okay, well, how does it apply to my life? I think for me what's been helpful is making the distinction between busy and hurry. That busy I would describe as this. Busy is that outward condition. Busy is the reality of the activities and the involvement that we are engaged in. And as you start to read the Gospels, you start to read the biographies of Jesus, you see that he was incredibly busy. That Jesus accomplished many things in a day. Jesus accomplished many things in his ministry. That Jesus was busy. But I'd also say that he was never hurried. And for me, hurried is that inner condition, is that ultimate attitude. It's that response to all of life. That you can be busy, but never hurried. Because you know that in the midst of your activity and all the things that are going on, that you're aware that your identity and worth and purpose is not found in those things. It's interesting when you start to read the Bible, you realize how God designed us to be people of rest, to be people who were not so busy. but we're able to rest so that we would not ultimately be hurried. Yet, one of the dangers is we have flipped the coin. And we suddenly start to think that as followers of Jesus, the busier I am, if I'm doing work for the church or if I'm doing work in my community, then the more faithful I must be. Or the busier I am, then the more spiritual mature I must be. But when you go back to the Bible, you see time and time again how God has created this pattern of rest in order to remove the hurry of life. In the very beginning, in Genesis, God created rest. That on the seventh day, God stopped creating and just simply rested. Then throughout the Old Testament, as God was developing the nation of Israel, he told them and reminded them again that one of the 10 commandments was remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And holy is that being set apart, that it's different from all the other days, that you are going to set apart a day, not only to spend to God, but to ultimately find that sense of rest. And then not only did God create it, not only did God command it, but God modeled it in Jesus. When God came in human form, Jesus would often, you read the Bible, and you read these little takeaways, that then Jesus would draw to a quiet place. That Jesus would then step away from the crowds. Understood the importance of rest, and then finally God promises that to us as well. One of the passages I continually come back to in my life and in my ministry is Matthew 11:28. When Jesus gives us this promise, he says, listen, if you are wearied, if you're heavy laden, if you're exhausted, come to me and I will give you rest. Do you ever start to think, when we think of how do we build our faith? How do we grow in our faith? We talk about the disciplines. We talk about the importance of prayer. We talk about the importance of reading the Bible. We talk about the importance of serving and the importance of giving. And those are all ways that we build our faith. But what about the discipline of rest? Of not allowing our lives to become so hurried that we start to lose not only who we are, but we start to lose that reality and that relationship with God. Because so much is at stake. So much is at stake in terms of, as this starts to drill down even deeper, in terms of how God has created us, in terms of what God desires for us. And so what's our response? I think the first step is to understand that this is a personal conversation that you have between yourself and God. Right? I think one of the dangers, one of the challenges is in failing to understand that different people have different capacities, right? And so often busyness is a measure of comparison. Of, well, am I as busy as so-and-so, or I'm busier than such and such? But we fail to understand is that God has wired us differently. That we have different personalities, we have different capacities, and what someone else may do may be reasonable for them, but unreasonable for us. And so understand that people have different capacities and characteristics in life. The other thing that's been helpful for me is understanding that there are different seasons in life. There are different stages in life. And so oftentimes when you enter into a season or a stage in life, whether it's, starting a new job or a new project at work, or depending on the age of your kids or the different things that are going on, there can be different stages of life. And so understand that as well. But how do we get back to this place of understanding that I can be busy, but I'll never want to be hurried? I believe it's Socrates that says, beware of the barrenness of a busy life. Beware of the barrenness of a busy life. That so often we think that just by doing more, I will find fulfillment. I will find a greater sense of satisfaction. But the problem is that we place our identity and our worth and our purpose in what we do as opposed to who we are in the sight of God. That's why Jesus says, I have a different way. I have a way that goes against what culture will tell you. I have a way where you'll find abundance in me. And so what can our next step be? On the back of your bulletin, there's 3 questions that I use in my life that may be helpful for you. And I wrote them down, and hopefully they will be helpful to you. But the first one is this: ways to assess my life, kind of check in with myself and ask myself, am I becoming too hurried in life? And the first one is this, with the phrase, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. The 2 questions I ask myself is, A, how often am I saying this? Right? Because that becomes a pretty good marker. And the second reason is, why am I saying this? And then oftentimes it may be as an approach to simply let people know that I'm significant, that I'm important, that I'm doing busy. I'm busy because God needs me. I got to be busy, busy, busy. And God's like, really? There's a person I know in my life that I've known for over a decade, and not exaggerating, every time I meet them and ask them, how are you doing? The response is, I'm so busy. It's been going on for a decade, and I saw them recently, and I walked away and I thought, that can't be. You can't always be busy. Like, that can't be the first words out of your mouth. But so often that's the reality we live with. And so ask yourself the question, how often am I saying this? And then why am I saying this? The second one is this: am I saying no to the right things? Let's understand something. Everybody says no to something. It's just whether or not we're intentional about it or not. Or maybe put another way, everybody says no to something. The question is, are we aware of the no we're saying to certain things? Because as we continue to say yes, as we continue to get more and more busy, we may be saying no to relationships. We may be saying no to new opportunities. And what happens so often is we may even be saying no to God. Because we become so busy, we become so overwhelmed that suddenly this relationship with God becomes yet another thing to do. Add it to the list. Yes, I'm busy, but I'll do it yet again. And so the question I start to ask myself, am I being intentional about what I say no to? And then the third one is this: how do I handle interruptions? Because the annoying thing about interruptions, you can't plan for them. They just show up. And I'm not asking how do you handle them, whether you say no or whether you say yes, but rather, what do interruptions do to you inside? Because we can say yes to things and say yes for the wrong reasons. That we can become so hurried on the inside that when an interruption comes, we become frustrated, we become annoyed. What's amazing, you start to look at Jesus' ministry, is he in many ways had a ministry of interruptions. That you read that Jesus was on his way to go do something, or to speak to someone, or to heal someone, and someone would interrupt him. And Jesus would respond in a way of compassion. What I've learned in my life is that for interruptions, I don't need to say yes to everything. I certainly don't have to say no to everything. But the question I ask myself is, how am I handling it inside? Because the closer I am to God, the more his Spirit is at work in my life, the more I'm able to respond in the right way. The more I'm able to say no or yes, depending upon what's going on. So for all of us here today, I recognize you're probably all incredibly busy, all incredibly involved in different things. The question I think that God wants to ask you is, what is your busyness doing to you? What's it doing to you? Jesus one day was asked a question. probably by a very busy guy. He came up to him one day and says, okay, Jesus, there's all these commands, right? We've got the 10 commandments. We then got all the other rules about the Pharisees, like 600 of these. Okay, just help me out, Jesus. What are the most important ones? Like bring it down, right? What's most important? Right? It seems like a question of a busy person, right? And Jesus responds with the song we sung to start the service. He says, love God with everything and love your neighbor as yourself. So love God, love others. I think one of the best ways that begins to happen is by living an unhurried life. When we focus upon our relationship with God, when we focus upon our relationship with others, and we truly find this incredible sense of rest in Him. I'm going to invite the musicians and singers to come up. And in a moment, we're going to come and we're going to celebrate communion, the Lord's table. And one of the great promises that Jesus says is, come to me and I will give you rest. Maybe for some of us here this day, today will be the first step in saying, Jesus, I want to find rest in you. I've been far too caught up in the busyness of life, in pursuing many other things to find identity and worth. And today, Jesus, I want to find that in you. For others who've already committed their lives to Christ, maybe today's a day to reassess and to say, maybe I've gotten too caught up in the busyness of life, in the busyness of church, and I need to refocus upon you. And so may the words that we're about to sing together, and may what God is speaking into your heart become a reality, so that even in the midst of your busyness, you will not be hurried. Because your identity, your worth, your sense of value is not found in the things you do, but rather in who God says you are. Please stand with me as we sing together.